Humans love meat. Many people think that meat is the best thing in the world, and a meal without meat is unacceptable and incomplete. This is pretty amazing since only a decade ago, meat was considered a luxury product. An increasing need of meat comes with the public eating habits. The average amount of meat consumed per capita of the world is 42.9 kilograms per year, which nearly doubled in the past 50 years. In addition, the meat production was 311.8 million tons in 2014, and the projected increase in global meat production is almost 76% by 2050. The huge amount of meat consumption has resulted in some negative influences on the environment. It accounted for 14.5% of all anthropogenic GHG emissions. It is already higher than 13% that comes from global transport each year. Livestock is the largest user of land resources in the world. The grazing land and cropland dedicated to the production of wheat represents almost 80% of all agricultural land, and total land area occupied by pasture is equivalent to 26% of the ice-free terrestrial surface. The huge amount of land used for livestock production has caused almost 30% of biodiversity loss till date. 27% of global freshwater consumption is used for meat and dairy production. To fulfill our ever-increasing demand, the meat industry has evolved into an intensive animal farming one. Intensive animal farming is a high-density stocking approach which maximizes the output of animal products and meat while using minimum input like land and other resources. With this approach, we can produce tons and tons of food for our growing population. Sounds grand, right? But the reality is grimmer than it seems. Let's take the chicken industry as an example. At the beginning of the production line, fertilized eggs are hatched in an incubator that has humidity and temperature controls. The hatched chicks are then poured out on the separator to filter out the shells and be transferred by a roller for classification. The female will be used for egg laying and meat later, while the male will directly be crushed for feed due to lower economic value. During the hen farming, the suffering on animals is far from ending. Using constant and specific wavelength light stimulation, the chickens inside are forced to keep eating. Therefore, the chickens nowadays can grow 3 times quicker than those in 1960. However, with organs and bones that are still developing, they cannot support their massive meat growth. Consequently, this can cause low stamina, trouble standing, and congestive heart failure for the chicken. With the dense population, the chickens are constantly exposed to concentrated ammonia produced in their waste, causing chemical burns in the eyes, respiratory systems, and skins. But what if I'm not really an animal welfare advocate? How does this bother me? Well, it does, at least to your health. As the animals are stocked in crowded farms with low hygiene level, they are vulnerable to diseases. To keep them alive until the slaughterhouses, tons of antibiotics are dosed using a shotgun approach, which means general antibiotics are used for every animal in the farm. As a result, the antibiotics that are not metabolized by animals can enter the food chain. An article issued on the American Society for Microbiology in 2011 mentioned that the excess precautionary use of antibiotics in animals can cause antibiotics resistance in our body upon consuming them. In fact, since 2010, US Food and Drug Administration had already agreed that the use of medically important antimicrobials for non-therapeutic use in food animal production does not protect or promote public health. Furthermore, without proper treatment, the pathogens in manure that developed antibiotics resistance will enter groundwater and threaten our freshwater supply. Another counterintuitive truth is that our meat industry even enhances food insecurity rather than relieves it. We know that obtaining the same amount of protein from meat requires much more resources than plants, so if your meal is heavily meat-based, you are adopting a relatively inefficient protein-consuming method. Under globalization, to fulfill our need, we can import more meat. However, it will intensify the competition for lands between exports or domestic food consumption in developing countries. If we put the crops used in feeding animals to nourish people directly, it can provide food resources to feed 4 million additional people. Then how can we deal with it? Let's start with the common delicacy, burger. Did you know that Americans eat 50 billion burgers each year? To make one beef burger, it takes 58 gallons of water, 41 square feet of land. The question here is, who says meat has to come from animals? Using meat analogs in the burger patty, 61,000 burgers can be generated instead of 348 beef burgers using the same amount of resources. Picture this. What would happen if the whole world becomes vegetarian? It would be like taking 12 million cars off the road for a year, getting the energy to power 2.3 million homes in a year. This would use lesser water, energy, and land, as well as emit less greenhouse gases.
Legit, it is legitimately delicious.
Guess what? HKU has started believing our belief too. The new joint OBC Burgers in HKU has Beyond Meat burgers. Let's ask people what they think of the taste.
The texture is completely good, and I feel they've got it right. I mean, it's the perfect blend of ingredients, and after having this, I realized that I've always been a non-vegetarian, but I think I can switch to becoming a vegan now, as it's delicious. I mean, I completely like it.
Does it taste like meat?
To an extent, it does.
We also held a survey to learn if people would consider these factors and choose to consider meat analogs. When asked about their vegetarianism, 85.7% of the people said they were non-vegetarian, and there was a tie between vegetarian and semi-vegetarian at 7.1%. About 70% of them said they may turn to vegetarianism or flexitarianism in the future. So what makes the uncertainty? When we asked which issues they encountered when eating vegetarian diet, we found that the highest concern was that their food choice is getting reduced, followed by cannot bear eating plants only, and worrying insufficient nutrients. Clearly, most of us want to go green without sacrificing our appetite. That's why the new vegetarian meat and its burger can become popular, since we can help relieve the problems while keeping our tasty burger. Not only the Beyond Burger patty looks and tastes like the real one, it has more iron and protein than the beef burger, with a fraction of the saturated fat only and no cholesterol, hormones or antibiotics. In our survey, about 70% of interviewees are willing to try the meat analogs given that it tastes the same. No wonder it generated $20 million annual revenues. Its rival, Possible Foods, are also generated $6.5 million revenue this year. When we ask whether they support or believe animal right or welfare, 44% believes in neither and 40% on the side for animal welfare, leaving only 16% supporting animal rights. We see that the majority of us won't mind go green for the sake of ourselves or the animal welfare if sustainable development is ensured. To get a better understanding of the whole picture, we explored some controversies regarding meat analogs. Turns out, everyone is loving the new plant-based burgers except vegans. In fact, the vegans seem to regard meat eating as sin and have zero tolerance to that. This year, the Torontonian vegans had already protested outside a meat-serving restaurant, calling the owner and consumers murderer. Considering the fact that vegetarian burgers stimulate the animal meat taste while Impossible Foods even use animal tests, the new burgers are already out of their menu. Before being popularized, vegetarian meat also faces a heated debate about its ingredients. When Impossible Foods and Beyond Meats are firstly sold in US supermarkets, they are pressurized to seek FDA's approval as using safe ingredients. Moreover, FDA and the people argue the validity of labeling them as meats in perspectives of food safety and culture. In the foreseeable future, if these vegetarian meats become a common alternative in Hong Kong, a hot debate is inevitable too. Some say vegetarian meat is unnatural and destroys our food culture. But most of the time, Our food culture is built by our taste. If vegetarian meat can give the same taste while doing our environment a favor, do its ingredients really matter that much to be qualified as a food or a meat? Just make sure your vegetarian diet is nutritious enough, then give it a try.